Everyone loves a good villain. Nosferatu, Hans Landa, Sauron, Darth Vader, and Judge Holden. The list of phenomenal villains is endless, and we just can't stop talking about them. They represent everything that we love about storytelling, the evil to triumph over, the dark side in all of us, and the result of falling for temptations to do the wrong thing. As long as there are heroes, there will be villains, and as long as we write stories, there will need to be an antagonist for the protagonist to stand up to. So today, we're going to be talking about villains. I have no idea how I didn't hit on this topic earlier. But it was all part of my dastardly master scheme. Wait until I almost kind of know what I'm doing on YouTube and then strike with a villainous video. And, brave hero, what you didn't know is that now, in my great villainous monologue, I shall explain my master plan. For those characters I mentioned in the beginning are not mere examples, but the very archetypes of great villains we will be discussing. You've fallen right into my trap. The last part of my master scheme before we begin is this. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the channel, which is kind of insane, and if possible, I'd like to hit 3,000 subs before we do so at the very end of May. It's not a super ambitious goal. At time of recording, we're only like 75 away, but it'd be kind of cool. Anyway, before I get too carried away in my plotting and scheming, our first villain archetype will be Part 1, the Night Demon. While also the name of a metal band I've seen in live concert alongside Blind Guardian, the Night Demon represents villains that are, to a degree, supernatural in their evil. They're often primordially, inherently evil, almost always impossible to redeem, and steeped in ritual and dark magics. These are some of our oldest villains, with tales of demons and evil spirits probably dating back as far as human civilization itself. Nosferatu isn't much different, as while I'll be referring to the version from the recent movie, Nosferatu himself goes about as far back as the early days of film as a medium in the 1922 movie of the same name. In the 2024 variant, however, he really lives up to the idea of the Night Demon archetype. He defies physical reality, bending the frame and appearing in places he shouldn't. He's inhumanly tall and strong, and of course, is a vampire. The Night Demon, to summarize, is a villain that isn't just a monster in the metaphorical sense, but one that is often actually physically a monster. However, this is not the only element, as it requires more for one to go from being a monster to a night demon. And that, in the case of Nosferatu, consists of a few separate concepts that apply to other creatures of this archetype. But the first of those is that he is inherently sort of magical. He only gains access to Ellen by visiting her in a dream and offering her the pact, which she accepts, that dooms her town. Often, that inherently magical nature which makes a night demon will involve things like this. You'll have pacts, most often of the Faustian bargain sense, that never work out very well. In Ellen's case, she not only has to spend the night with him, but she also dies in that process. It could be fairly argued that this aspect of the Night Demon is rather tropey. The Faustian bargain is present in so many stories and in so many ways, but one, tropes are not bad if used intelligently, and two, it serves a point. You can't make a deal with evil and expect to escape the consequences. Sure, we don't have a Nosferatu to offer ourselves up to in real life, but there are lots of ways that we can give in to our human failings and do the wrong thing, and that's what the Night Demon represents in this aspect. Their next concept is that almost always, but not inherently, does the Night Demon have a religious or at least spiritual framing. The way in which this takes form can widely vary, of course, but even Nosferatu, which doesn't deal too explicitly with religion save for the Eastern Orthodox nuns that rescue Thomas, uses traditional alchemical and or witchcrafty imagery and concepts to sell the ideal of Nosferatu. He isn't really just a vampire, he is literally a devil, evil incarnate. Another aspect of this archetype is the resistance to modernity. This might actually be one of, if not the strongest unifying trait of a night demon. It doesn't matter how big your gun is or how cool your science is, the night demon does not respond to those efforts to destroy it. I find that Warhammer, both Fantasy and 40k, deal with this pretty well. The demons in Warhammer are more vulnerable to melee as opposed to being shot, for example, because having to fight it in close quarters is more personal, and that personal nature lends people power. This is very pronounced in 40k, where shooting a demon with a lasgun that can shatter cinder blocks with a single shot is laughably less effective than battling it skillfully with a more or less conventional sword. It's only those sorts of non-concrete traits relying on alchemy or faith or other more traditional or personal methods that manage to defeat the Night Demon, and it is for that reason that Night Demons become distinguished from just another spooky monster. It gives them significance. You can't just shoot Nosferatu with the 12 gauge, as much as people might joke about that sort of thing with those types of villains, because he doesn't care about physics. It's about the symbolism. You can argue terminal velocity and damage to soft tissue all you want, but Nosferatu is just playing a different ballgame entirely. No matter how far the material world advances, material advances do not defeat the metaphysical representation of the Night Demon. When writing your own, it's about the careful combination of these very elements that will create a proper Night Demon, and while specific in its guidelines, there's still a lot of freedom to innovate on, which is why these villains have appeared for so long and will do so for probably forever. Next part, however, is Archetype 2, the Charming Mastermind. Now, you can, of course, have villains that are just charming or just a mastermind, but honestly, having both is a lot of fun, and we can discuss both of these aspects by structuring it like this. And good old, or bad old, I guess, Hans Landa from Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds is a wonderful example of the charming mastermind. This is, of course, because Hans Landa is a perfect synthesis of the concept. He is a mastermind through his charm. Christoph Waltz has won awards for his role in this movie for a very good reason. With the charming mastermind, you never know quite what they're thinking, when the next thing said is going to send them into an explosive frenzy or into a long and almost pleasant conversation. They are perfect for maintaining tension even in otherwise conventional scenes, and the audience will hang off their every word because it's always 1 minute to midnight with them. In the case of Hans Landa, we've introduced him through that horrifying scene of him hunting down the Dreyfus family and his confrontation with the farmer protecting them from the Nazis. So much is done not only by how he slowly establishes and enforces his own reputation with the farmer by making him repeat his title, but with his every expression. Even if it's just two men alone in a room, even though the farmer is physically bigger and probably stronger than Hans Landa, there's no doubt about who's in control of the situation, even without considering the Nazi soldiers standing outside the house. Now, of course, when it comes to writing charming masterminds, the trick is, as with any character really, that this character will only be as charming and as much of a mastermind as the writer themselves is. This kind of character takes a lot of effort to write. A lot of careful consideration, and in particular a close eye to catching inconsistencies, and making their capabilities seem believable, but also impossible to beat. It's a razor's edge, but when it's done right, it's a nearly perfect villain type. These are also the sorts we just love to see in media, and there are plenty of examples of them, even though they can take on all sorts of forms. The Joker, for example, in many portrayals is something of a charming mastermind, for these are the characters we love and love to hate. You want them to get their comeuppance, but can't help but enjoy watching them do their thing, either for the sheer force of personality or out of sheer horror at their capabilities. But there are two more concrete elements, I would say, for nailing down a charismatic mastermind. The first is control. More than any other type of villain, the charismatic mastermind is always in control of any situation that they're in. They do not react in blind anger. If they can be tricked, it will only be once, and thus that will be their downfall. And everyone in the room is afraid of them, not because of what they are doing, but because of what they are afraid that they might be about to do, or the contingency the villain has for whatever they themselves might attempt. The second element is the plan. In Inglourious Basterds, Landa plays his entire game for his own sake alone. While he is a Nazi and gladly participates in exactly what you'd expect of an SS officer, he isn't particularly loyal to the cause. He knows Germany is losing, so as the movie theater gambit of the film's final act starts to play out, he offers to let our protagonists accomplish their mission, so long as he gets off scot-free. And he even does, almost. He's the only Nazi involved to survive that whole affair, and he does live at the end of the movie. Just not without getting a funny new forehead tattoo courtesy of Aldo Rain. In general, the charismatic mastermind always knows their next move, and through force of personality and only selectively brute force, they are able to see those plans through all the way until they make their fatal mistake. That in of itself is kind of a trait of the charming mastermind, that it often isn't the heroes directly thwarting them that results in their downfall, but a mistake they made that the heroes then capitalize on. In Londa's case, it's trusting Aldo Rain to accept his immunity deal with no strings attached, which we all knew Aldo Rain wasn't going to let happen. But after that, we have Archetype 3, the Dark Lord. They don't get much more classic than this. The Dark Lord, alternatively known as the Puppet Master, is the one behind an often quite large-scale villainy. They don't have to be at the head of affairs themselves and can instead sit in the back lines, guiding everything from afar, but both are Dark Lords. Much as the Dark Lord is a classic example of a villain archetype, Sauron is perhaps one of the most classic examples of a Dark Lord. An evil as old as the world itself and the essential embodiment of evil alongside his predecessor Melkor. While Sauron's physical appearances throughout The Lord of the Rings are very limited, his presence, best emphasized by that infamous Eye of Sauron, is felt everywhere. He is beyond morality and shares a few things in common with the Night Demon. However, where the Night Demon works alone and has a more explicitly magical or religious angle, the Dark Lord commands legions and can take on a fair few variants, though a good bit of magic never does hurt, and I mean Sauron does have that. One key point about villains in general that I haven't brought up yet is that they are always in some way defined by their relationship with the protagonists. With the Night Demon, the villain is a tormentor. With the charming mastermind, the villain is usually a rival. But with the Dark Lord, the villain is something entirely beyond the hero. Even should the hero here not be your usual tropey farm boy, they still aren't going to be on the same level as the Dark Lord. Take our Sauron example. Frodo, in Tolkien's genius, is one of the least intimidating or badass heroes in all of fiction. At least, that's how it is on the face of it. And that's not backhanded either. Keep with me. He's just a little guy from a village of people that produce no warriors and spend most of their time gardening, eating, and otherwise hanging out. It's not the place you expect the world-saving hero to come from. And yet, and I know I've said this in other videos, but I think it's important enough to say again, the point of Frodo is that Tolkien wanted to show us that villains come from the most unassuming of places, and that the traits of a hero are multifaceted. Aragorn is a hero. He is the true king of Gondor, come to reclaim his throne and lead his people, and by extent all of the peoples of Middle-earth, to cast away the darkness that Sauron seeks to impose on the world. He is brave, he is powerful, and he is a strong fighter. Definitely a hero. Gandalf, of course, is also a hero. He's a mighty wizard who bravely sacrifices himself to protect his friends from the Balrog, and who wields his mighty magic to cast down evil. Definitely a hero. And yet, what Frodo is brave, diligent, and good. He isn't that powerful, and he isn't even perfect. As we all know, the ring does get to him at the end there a bit, but it doesn't triumph. Not least because he has our main man, the friend we all wish we had, Samwise Gamgee, at his side. Sauron has his own fatal flaw, and it is that he never expected that, should others get their hands on the One Ring, that they would seek to destroy it rather than use it for their own ends. There's also a reason, I think, that none of the original rings were given to any hobbits, and so it makes sense that only a hobbit would have the inner strength to destroy the One Ring. I could go on further in that regard, especially about how this was proven by how even Boromir, an underrated character by the way, was tempted by the ring despite genuinely being heroic. Even he wasn't as strong in that way as Frodo and Sam were. But these are the concepts you'll be dealing with in terms of Dark Lords. Often it ends up not being so much the personality of the Dark Lord that defines the story, but their role as a presence within the story. Often this removedness from the goings-on of the story directly leads to their downfall. Yet you see the Dark Lord in more abstract ways throughout the story. in the way that those who serve them are an expression of the Dark Lord and what they represent, in the way they change the land around them or bring about a new Dark Age in the places that they conquer. In the end, the Dark Lord may become a character in a way that is akin to the way a setting is a character. After that, however, we have Part 4, The Redeemed. The purpose of this one is pretty clear, I think, and this is a specific category for the type of villain whose purpose ultimately is to be redeemed. This isn't, and really shouldn't, be something that is clear to the audience from the beginning of your story, but I do think that villains should be designed, at least from the writer's perspective, from inception as one who should ultimately be redeemed. That isn't to say that at the start of the story they are someone who should be redeemed, but it's that should be the intent for the end of the character's arc. I say this very specifically because otherwise you might get that Steven Universe meme where definitely not redeemable villains get that treatment and it just ends up feeling wrong and kind of grody. That's especially true when put in the context of the previous villain types and even the one that will follow this one. There are villains that really should not be redeemed. Nosferatu, or any night demon, is not going to be redeemed. A night demon who is redeemed never was a night demon. Clever masterminds can sometimes be redeemed, but often their strength comes from their consistency in a certain idea, once again working with something like Hans Landa's self-preservation. Him letting the movie theater plan work wasn't him redeeming himself. It was him remaining fully in character with his one true value of doing whatever he can to stay alive and in control. Dark Lords can maybe be redeemed, but it's very rare. Sauron was never going to be redeemed. To a certain extent, especially when you're dealing with the fact that Dark Lords are so often committing evil at just massive scales that forgiving them or even allowing them the last word would be a miscarriage of justice, there is no AU where either of World War II's mustache men get redeemed at the end. The first one made his one good decision in 1945, and the second died soaked in his own piss, and that's how it was always supposed to be. However, you might have had a double take when considering we're talking about Darth Vader as our example here. And I actually chose him because his redemption is quite complex the more you think about it. He was the Dark Lord, or more accurately, the right hand of the Dark Lord. He killed a bunch of kids, helped blow up planets, and all that sort of thing. There are mitigating factors: his long-term grooming by Palpatine, the orchestrated death of his wife, and all the rest, but none of it excuses the evil things he did. Yet, when Luke is backed against the wall, and when Luke's own efforts to find the humanity left in his father are so earnest, that little spark that remained finally rekindles within Vader, once again Anakin Skywalker, and he throws the Emperor down a big pit. However, the crucial thing about that redemption is that it is quick, and you do not deal with the consequences of it for very long. It would not have worked if he'd have lived very much longer. No matter how good that single act was, it doesn't erase all of the bad, so narratively speaking, he had to die afterward. This works in two particular ways. Emotionally, because Vader's evils, while intellectually acknowledged, rarely emotionally affect the audience throughout Star Wars, so we're more willing to buy it in that sense. And second, narratively, because, as said, there's no world in which he just goes back to being a farmer or something. Much as his injuries on Mustafar put him in the Vader suit, it needs him as much as he needs it. He was never going to live without it once he had it, and it represents the inability of him to fully atone for the bad things he's done. And that is the key with villain redemption. Scale must be kept in mind. Vader's evils were great, so his redemption is materially small. Past a certain point, villains can't be redeemed at all, but their redemption must be proportional to the evil they did for it to work emotionally. And finally, we have Part 5, Undiluted Evil. Some villains are so beyond moral consideration, so thoroughly willing to commit the most unspeakable of acts after a smile and a handshake, and yet so thoroughly capable that they defy any description beyond undiluted evil. This is a category I literally made for Judge Holden from Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. Undiluted evil is the category of villain who is the all-in-one. Aspects of the Night Demon, the Charming Mastermind, and the Dark Lord all in one, with redemption not even the first spark of a thought. In my opinion, the Judge is maybe the single best villain that I've ever read, and that's why he's the way that I'm ending this video. And also why he might be the thumbnail. Because he does it all. You might think that it's because he has all of these aspects, that he's strong, smart, charismatic, and all that he's a great villain. But if anything, it's almost in spite of all of those things. We all know about the almost cartoonish villains, the one who do evil because it's evil, who have no reasons other than the narrative need for a character that can be thoroughly and soundly destroyed without an ounce of regret or the batting of an eye. And yet the Judge, for how overpowered he is, doesn't fall into that trap, and that is for a very specific, singular, crucial reason. He doesn't lose. He is a primordial evil, and any of you who've read the novel know the extent of his horrors. From the very outset, when he is first introduced, we see the kind of thing he is. When he enters a tent where a religious service is taking place, he announces to everyone therein that the preacher has committed a number of heinous crimes, one even involving a goat. He rallies the crowd against the preacher until an audience member stands and shoots him. A fight breaks out, and our protagonist, the kid, cuts a hole in the tent so he can escape. All that for the kid to see the Judge later and hear a question asked to him. "Judge, how did you come to have the goods on that no account?" "Goods," said the Judge. "When was you in Fort Smith?" "Fort Smith? Where did you know him to know all that stuff on him?" "You mean the Reverend Green?" "Yes, sir. I reckon you was in Fort Smith before you come out here." "I was never in Fort Smith in my life." "Doubt that he was." They looked from one to the other. "Well, where was it you run up on him?" "I never laid eyes on the man before today. Never even heard of him." He raised his glass and drank. There was a strange silence in the room. The men looked like mud effigies. Finally, someone began to laugh, then another. Soon they were all laughing together. Someone bought the Judge a drink. So he just made it up. That's the kind of evil we're dealing with, and it's only the start. Many of the things he's done would get me in trouble to say on YouTube, but he is ultimately informed by something unlike the cartoonish evil as established by his speech on war, which is too long for me to read here, but good enough that you should seek it out, or even just read the whole novel if the incredible wanton violence is something you can stomach. But the Judge is the kind of evil that represents just all the worst things about the world. The evils that, no matter how far along humanity claims to progress, will always blight it in some form or another. Sure, there aren't many or any people like the Judge. Sure, there aren't any or many people like the Judge, this avatar of pure darkness, but that isn't the point. The point is that you don't defeat the type of evil he represents. You only resist it, and it is the resisting that gives us a purpose to doing good even when triumph over evil proves to be impossible. That's also my interpretation of the ending of the novel. Thanks for attending my mini critical analysis of Blood Meridian. I'd make a multi-hour video on the subject if anyone would watch it, but I tried that already with the All the King's Men video, so that might have to wait a while. Anyway, I think we've about covered some great villainous archetypes. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any thoughts of your own about writing villains or your own favorites, I read every comment and would love to see them. In addition, every like and subscription goes a long way since we're still small here at JPAT. We also have a Discord if you want to hang out with my editor and I, and a Patreon if you're crazy enough to want it, where we post all our videos a week early. On that note, I'd like to thank those patrons of ours: Shadowrunner and Sawnee, Knights of the Inner Circle, Nico, our Knight, and Greer, our Loyal Squire. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and remember, as another excuse for me to read from Blood Meridian, you can find meanness in the least of creatures, but when God made man, the devil was at his elbow.